is that?
The Poundstone flag. The reason we're doing this is because Thursday was Flag Day. June 14th, every year is Flag Day. It's because in 1777, the Second Continental Congress decreed that the flag would be red, white, and blue. It would be the stars and stripes. Before that, there were a lot of different designs and colors, but from that day forward, that has been our national banner, the stars and stripes. Gone through a lot of different changes over the years, but I'm not here to talk about the history of the United States flag. I'm here to talk about the Poundstone flag. The reason it's called the Poundstone flag is because of this young man here, Sergeant George Poundstone. He was a member of the 53rd Illinois Volunteer Regiment. He was the head of the color guard unit that carried this flag, and he carried this flag into a lot of battles. So I'll start at the beginning of the history of the 53rd. Where would the beginning be? The election of 1860, I guess. I think 2016 was contentious. Should have been around in 1860. People were so torqued off and so angry, 7 states actually left the Union. Lincoln didn't recognize those 7 states beginning to form the Confederate States of America, because he was an attorney more than he was a politician. And in his mind, a contract can only be broken if both sides agree to break the contract. And the North didn't agree. So he told the South, this great experiment of self-government is not going to end under my watch. We're not letting you secede. Well, they said, we're going anyway, and if you don't let us go peacefully, we're going to go by force. Most people in the northern half of the country thought, fine, bring it on. A bunch of ragtag farmers, a bunch of shopkeepers, amateur soldiers are never going to defeat the standing army of the United States of America. And, that would be your reasoning, but they forgot that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers 80-some years earlier were a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers and amateur soldiers that defeated the English, the greatest army in the world. So it could be done. And Lincoln knew that. And Lincoln said, he was a little more astute than the average person. Lincoln said if it comes to an armed conflict, that it was going to be long, it was going to be bloody, and it was going to affect every household, it was going to affect every person in every town in the United States. And he was absolutely right, because in hindsight, you can see he was absolutely right. The first big conflict happened on July 20th, 1861, just 4 months after Lincoln was inaugurated, and that was the Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, whichever side you were on, whatever you want to call it. And what happened at the Battle of Bull Run surprised almost everybody in the country. The South routed the regular army of the United States. This happened right in front of Washington, D.C., and the army of the United States fled in terror. They ran into chaos and retreated into Washington, D.C. If the South right then had chased them into Washington, D.C., they would have captured the capital, and it would have all been over. But they didn't follow up on it. So people then started to realize, okay, this is going to be a long, drawn-out thing, like Lincoln said. Lincoln sent out a call to arms. He gave each of the states a quota of how many men each state was needed to provide for the defense of the Union. And Illinois got their number. I don't remember offhand what that number is. Governor Yates put out the word he needed volunteers, he needed regiments. Well, it was then that 2 people from Ottawa, Daniel Hitt and William Cushman, very prominent businessmen in LaSalle County, very well known, very well respected, took it upon themselves to raise a regiment. And the regiment they raised eventually became the 53rd Illinois. But it was a very, very aggressive and bold statement to make that they were going to raise a regiment of soldiers out of LaSalle County. Because a regiment was 1,000 men. And to say we're going to get 1,000 people, 1,000 young men and boys, to walk away from their parents, to walk away from their jobs, to walk away from their girlfriends, and go fight, was a big task. Especially when you look at the makeup of LaSalle County in 1861. It was not a really highly populated county. The biggest town was Ottawa, and they only had 10,000 themselves. LaSalle was the next biggest town. They had 4,000 people. You know, and then Streator wasn't even here yet. This is 5 years before Colonel Plum showed up, and 21 years before we became a city and Plum was elected our mayor. So there was just probably 200 to 400 people living in what it was then called Bruce Township. The city wasn't here yet. So to raise 1,000 men was a very, very bold thing to try to do. But they did it. They started in early October, and by mid-December, they had 1,000 men. 800 of them were from LaSalle County. They had 8 companies. Now, a regiment was made up, 1,000 men was made up of 10 companies of 100 men each. And your 10 companies of 100 men equals 1,000. 8 companies were raised in LaSalle County. There was one company came from Grundy County, and another company was a combination of Putnam and Marshall County. And they were added to the 800. Cushman sent the paperwork down to Springfield. Governor Yates looked it over, and he declared that this new regiment would be the 53rd Illinois. The reason it's the 53rd Illinois, people ask me all the time what the number meant. It just meant there was a 53rd regiment to be approved to be a United States Army volunteer regiment. No other meaning to the number. It was the 53rd to be approved. They were told in mid-December, be ready to go at any minute because you're going to get a call and you're going to have to report to duty. Well, they finally got it right before Christmas, 1861. They were told to report as soon as possible to Camp Douglas in Chicago. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, they had a kickoff rally to send the troops to Camp Douglas from Washington Square in Ottawa. They say over 30,000 people showed up to see this small new regiment march off to war. It was on December 26th that the ladies of Bruce Township presented this flag to the regiment. The regimental history only says that the flag was made and donated to the regiment by a group of ladies from Bruce Township, which is Streator now. It doesn't give any other explanation, but I've read a lot about the Civil War, I've read a lot about flags, so I can speculate with a little bit of educated guess. And I love to speculate, even when it's not educated. I can tell you that. But I speculate that it was mostly the wives, the mothers, the girlfriends, and the sisters of the soldiers that had enlisted. Because when Cushman would have their rallies, and they had them all over the county, not just the young men would show up, but the whole community would show up. Because there wasn't much else going on in 1861 in forms of entertainment. And at the rally, there'd be bands and there'd be speeches. They'd dress up a young man into a Civil War uniform and have him stand up there and they'd talk about, how glorious war is and chivalrous it is, and they painted a very rosy picture for these young men. And when it came time to get them to sign the paper, they'd have a plant in the audience who would raise his hand and say, "I'm not a coward, I'll sign up," and he'd march up front and sign. Of course, peer pressure would make everybody else start signing up. At each one of these rallies, they hoped to get 100 men and create separate companies that way. But not only would the young men come, but their wives, their moms, they would show up too, and they would get caught up in the war fever and want to support this new regiment. So a lot of times, groups of women would raise money to buy Bibles. So all the men of the regiment could carry a Bible with them through the war. Sometimes they'd make up little sewing kits. And a lot of times the women got together and offered to make their regimental flag. So I'm guessing that's what happened. It was the mothers, the wives, girlfriends, sisters of the men who had enlisted. So they march off up to Joliet,